Okay, so what we're looking at here is TinkerCAD, and in TinkerCAD you can design 3D shapes. So it's a 3D design tool, but you can use TinkerCAD and other software like Fusion 360 and other things like that to do more than just design 3D shapes that you can maybe 3D print. So I'm going to sort of go through some ways you can use, in this example, use TinkerCAD in somewhere like something like maths. But you can also use it in areas like English or potentially even humanities, but I'll go into how you might want to use those in a little bit. So let's do it. I'm going to use a couple of basic shapes. I'm not going to use anything fancy for this at the moment. But if I take a box across over here, as you can see, and let's just resize it a little bit. Now, one of the tools you've got in TinkerCAD is something called the work plane. And so I'm going to put the work plane on the top of my surface here. And what that means is when I put another shape on top, so for example, another box, it's going to be lying flat. So if I go from the front, if you look at that, if I look from the front, it's flush. The two are flush on that surface. So what that means is now is when I want to resize this, like I'm going to do here, I know it's going to be flush on that surface. So basically what I'm looking at the moment is, for example, is making a tissue box. It's not going to be a very good tissue box, I've got to say, but it's going to be like a tissue box. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it by eye, which is pretty much what I'm doing at the moment, and it's not ideal, but I'm just trying to get a rough approximation. Okay, but the idea is if I now look at this, have a look at this, and I make this one a hole. The idea of making it a hole is when I group them, I'm going to group it and ungroup it, and I'll show what I mean. So when I group it, actually, let's oops, I did that wrong. Let's only select one. I want to push that down a bit, just so you can see what I'm talking about. If I go like this and put that in there, I've made a little hole in there. So that's where the idea of the tissue box is coming in. So I'm actually going to ungroup it because I want to play around with it a bit. Now, depending on where you put your work plane on, you can start to see different measurements. But at the moment, if I go around from the side, not exactly where I want it to be. Okay. Now, if I bring this down, so if I've got this one here, I'm bringing it down. You notice, because I've got both selected, I keep doing that. Sorry about that. I just want this one. So I'm going to bring this down. See where it says on the side here, it says -10. It's -10 relative to that particular work plane. So potentially you could use that in a maths type thing to work out, how they look at different distances and how things are moving relative to a work plane. But also, if I change the position of my work plane, so now my work plane is, I'm going to grab the work plane and bring it back to my original surface. If I start to bring that down, that number is now relative to this bottom part, and I can start to use, I can say it's 4 millimeters above, I want it 5, so I can move it. Now, if you think about it in terms of a maths lesson where you're trying to look at, it's that visual spatial understanding of how things work in a 3D environment as opposed to a 2D, and sometimes 2D is really hard to translate. Students can start to see how they can apply some of their understanding of measurement type topics on this. And that's where I see the real benefit in this in a maths classroom. They can start to see how it actually looks in a more realistic way than just, I want to try to draw it and see what it looks like. I think the other benefit here is proportion. And so you can actually see if I change particular, maybe not that one. If I change particular shapes, I see differences in size, and you can actually then relate that back to surface area and perimeter. You can make a whole lot of things about that, comparing maybe the surface area of just the cube. But now I've put a hole in it, what is my surface area? And they might have to understand what those measurements are that you've done. Maybe they have to label them. Maybe they have to understand that if I'm 5 meters above the surface, but my height in this case, let's go to height, my height is 20. That means I've got 15 mils on the side, and I've got to account for that. So there's a lot of ways you can actually just use a basic tissue box for students to get an idea of mass. And so and the reason I showed you the work plan before, so if I went from the side again, so I went from the side, Okay. If I now see where that little cone shaped here, that's now relative to this work plane. So it's pulling it from that side. So if I move, again, I always pick the wrong one. I want this one here. And you can see that I'm moving there. And that means it's 3 mils from that work plane. But if I want, that means if I want to work out 3 mils here, I'm going to have to go across to this work plane and not move it. Well, not move the whole thing. I need to just, not that one. Sometimes trying to find the right thing to pull on here is the hardest part. Let's just use that one then. That one. And if I pick the right one to pick, but I think you get my idea. I haven't picked the right one because I want it relative to there, but I think you get my idea here of how you might want to use something like this in a maths classroom. Now, the reason at the start I said about English, you could potentially have students actually take something they're reading and try to get an interpretation of how that looks in a more visual sense. So students could actually then replicate what they're seeing in a visual way, not just in a written way. And potentially you could do something similar in a more of a social sciences sort of aspect. You could probably use it even in science. Now, this is just one way to do it, and it is a sort of a fairly quick way. You could do a lot more options with it. So in the final thing, sorry about that last bit, it should have worked, but if I then group it, and that could be their final product. Now, as simple as that looks, they might have to, you might have to get students to actually show a whole bunch of different measurements in here. You've got the scale, it's in millimeters, but you might say, well, I want it in centimeters, so they have to be able to convert between, 55 mils, what's that in terms of centimeters? If you're doing it in meters, again, what's the scale that they've got to use? What are the conversion factors they've got to put into it? You could have one with this, one with this in millimeters, another in centimeters. Again, whatever you want to do with that, it could be done. Now, you might go, well, what if I want this, but I don't want them to print it because I don't have a printer. I just don't, the printing's not the purpose here. 3D print, how can I show it? In the next part of the video, I'm going to show one way you can do that. It does assume you have Office 365, but when I go through it, I'll show you how you can actually make that work. Okay, now I said we're going to go into PowerPoint Office 365, but first you have to export it. So I'm going to, because we need a file that we can use. We can export, we can use any of these ones. I tend to use STL. It's the most common one to use for, I don't know if it's the most common, but it's the most common one I've used personally. So I'd click on STL, and that's just a 3D print image format we use. Okay, so that's when you do save it wherever you need to save it, and then we'll bring that into PowerPoint. Okay, so here we are in PowerPoint. Now, as I said before, you do need Office 365. Well, that's what I've used. I mean, that's my experience I'm using. So basically what you do, you're going to go into Insert. So I'm going to click on Insert, and I click on 3D models. Now, I can bring in any 3D model I want. I can go to, if I'm doing a chemistry, I could get something to do with that, or you can get stuff from different museums. So if you want to bring some more of a museum type of setup in, you can do that if you're doing things. But in this case, we're talking about maths. In this particular case, how you might use it. Again, there's a range of different things. So here's, again, example of stuff I've downloaded about Michelangelo's David. There's some stuff about molecules. Here's a heart, Lego anatomy thing. But again, I'm picking this is the one I just did then, and I'm going to insert it, and it's an STL file. So it looks like there's nothing there, but basically if I rotate it, I can actually have my shape as a 3D object here. Okay, so students, students would be able to potentially show what they've done. They could move it around and talk about the different dimensions too as a way to present it. They could make this, have this as a video where they can talk about some of the different things they've done or how they measurement. Or if it's presenting to a class, if you wanted to then use an animation, and I go, say for example, turntable, it can slowly rotate. Now, by default, that is just going to turn once around it like it's on a turntable. If I'm there talking and I want that to be moved around all the time, I can go here and have it continuous, and that will mean it will continuously loop. I can do it half. As you can see, the different effect options, you can select which one you want. Okay, so there's a range of different things you can do. You can swing it. I tend not to swing it. I just like the turntable, but if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. And the reason I show it here is because often people think, 3D object, you're going to print it. You don't have to. You don't have to print this to showcase, for a student to showcase their work. And be that, in this case, using this as the idea of a mass bit of work, or something else where they want to show their 3D work for in terms of English or humanities or science or whatever it happens to be. This is a good way to show it. Okay. Again, there might be other tools that you use. That's perfectly fine. This is just one way I know, and it's sort of an easy way for me to make use of. Thank you.